Hey guys, Tom Barclay here, just at Tottenham Hotspur's training ground. Just done the press conferences with Ange Postecoglou and Guglielmo Vicario ahead of what is, let's be honest, Spurs' biggest game of the season against AZ Alkmaar, or RZ as it should be. Second leg, 1-0 down from the first leg. Let's be honest, if it weren't for Vicario and two massive saves in that game, it would be far worse. It was a terrible performance out in Alkmaar last week, but 1-0 is very doable. Big chance for Spurs to turn it around, and it's an absolutely crucial game to keep alive any semblance of success this season after an absolutely injury decimated campaign, which has led to them being dumped out of both domestic cup competitions and, most importantly, dropping down to 13th in the table and being nowhere near being in with a shout of European qualification. But salvation can be had from the Europa League. And while they remain in it, there's always a chance. But let's be honest, if it doesn't go the way that Spurs fans will be hoping tomorrow and Postecoglou will be hoping tomorrow, and they do go out, then the pressure will be cranked up absolutely up to 11 on Postecoglou after this, and you would worry whether he would survive it, to be honest. But before then, they've got a game to turn it around, and like I say, keep it all alive. So, press conference today, there was, that kind of dominated both presses with Ange and with Vicario, the significance of the game, the wider context of the season, Ange's tenure. And he was in quite a relaxed mood. He even made a sort of bit of a joke at one point with one reporter who he sees quite regularly, joking that he sort of put his translator headphones on in a joke to sort of suggest that he couldn't quite understand him, which was quite funny, to be fair, and sort of showed his kind of relaxed mood. But also he was asked, quite early on whether about the way this game has been framed as sort of do or die for Spurs' season, but not just for their season, but also for Postecoglou himself and his project. And he kind of bristled at it, and in kind of typical Ange fashion, he sort of hit back with a line about how in no other profession would you be sort of asked that kind of question and be sort of put in that kind of awkward position. And I understand that, and it kind of sums up Ange in a way. It's very relatable. You can get the point he's making. But at the same time, this is no ordinary profession. This is being a Premier League football manager. And also at Tottenham Hotspur, this is one of the biggest clubs in the country, and with that comes scrutiny, with that comes riches. There's a reason why you are paid as much as you are as a Premier League football manager, and particularly at a club like this, because of the scrutiny that comes with it. And so when it's not going well, like it hasn't this season, even though injuries can be a mitigating factor, you expect these kind of tough questions, and that's just the way it is. Doesn't mean that he can't respond in whatever way he wants, and so he's totally entitled to do that. But don't be surprised, I suppose, to have those kind of questions, because that's just kind of the territory, I suppose. And it feels like, before I get into what he said about today and what Guglielmo said as well, I feel like the last week or so has been quite a crucial 7 days or so in the Postecoglou tenure. And I don't think I really quite realised it till Sunday against Bournemouth, how crucial, I suppose, the performance against Alkmaar in the first leg, even if it sort of proves to come to nothing if they get through and people forget about it. But it felt quite a moment, because much of this season has been explained away by the injuries, and I've been a big part of that. I feel like deferring judgment till players have come back and there isn't a game every 3 days and the team isn't completely jaded by all these fixtures has been kind of fair enough. But then they had, 8 days free ahead of the Alkmaar game. And yes, they didn't have their full contingent back. They had the strongest bench I can remember in ages, but they still had key players missing, including their best player this season in Kulusevski. So it's not like it was all completely fine. And Romero and Van der Ven didn't even get off the bench. But having said that, it was still quite worrying how poor that performance was. And like I said, if it weren't for Vicario saves, this game could be out of sight. This tie could be over with pretty much already. So that felt like quite a momentum shifter, I think, in the sort of narrative around Ange's tenure, and fans who've been sort of willing to give him this extra understanding, I suppose, around the situation this season and all the injuries. A bit of patience, I feel like, was ebbed away at, and after that performance, and also really after Bournemouth, to be honest. I know they came back and drew 2-2, which on the face of it looks like showing the players massively behind the manager, and things are showing that they've got fight in them. And yeah, that is true, to be fair. They were 2-0 down. But that isn't quite reflective of how the game actually went. Let's be honest. Sarr scores a goal out of absolutely nowhere. He's trying to cross. I think Son goes in, and then there's an absolute gimme of a penalty. I don't know what Kepa's doing, which Son converts to make it 2-2. And whilst they just deserve credit for sort of fighting back, I think overall they were very lucky to get a point out of that game. And I don't think it really sort of shifted the dial much in terms of how people were feeling about the season. Going into this massive game against AZ, really. But anyway, Ange was asked about the pressure I guess he's feeling going into this game with the season on the line and maybe his job on the line. And he was never going to sort of go, oh, suddenly I'm really feeling it. No manager would, so it's not surprising his answer. But the question's got to be asked anyway, I think. And he said, no, there's no extra pressure. Disappointed by the first leg, and he sort of reiterated how tight it is in this particular contest. Obviously only one goal in it. You really do feel like Spurs could do with an early goal, a bit like Paris Saint-Germain last night against Liverpool. That goal from Dembele early doors really made a big difference in that game, and you do feel like Spurs really need to get a good start, I would argue. He said there was a big role for the fans to play. And this is an interesting one because I feel like there's been a bit of pushback from supporters over Ange and Son after the Bournemouth game, sort of referencing the atmosphere in that match. And it kind of alludes to what I was talking about a minute ago about how the momentum feels like it shifted a little bit in the last week or so. And frustration from fans who've been very patient this season, sort of, still seeing sort of poor performances or wildly inconsistent ones. And then being a bit of pushback in the sense of, feeling like they're being criticised when they've been pretty supportive, I guess, of the team, despite all the pretty either poor performances or particularly poor results this season. But having said that, Ange is right on, hoping for a good atmosphere. He made the point again that in Alkmaar, their supporters made a big difference in the way they supported the team, and he's just reiterating. He's not sort of telling anyone how to act. He's just hoping for a good atmosphere because he knows what a crucial role it can play. He referenced the Liverpool game in the Cup. He referenced the Man City game in the Cup as well, in the League Cup, the Carabao Cup earlier this season, and what a difference, or what a contributing factor to those victories, that atmosphere that was generated by the fans, the role that they played in that, and he's hoping for more. And Vicario was saying a similar thing, and I'll come on to his comments as well. He was also asked about whether he regretted saying that I always win in my second season. I've gone back and looked at what he said, and I still don't really see his point, to be honest. And I know a lot of you probably will push back and say I'm sort of misreading it, but it was brought up by the interviewer back in September that he'd said this in pre-season. But for me, it's the way he's responded. He didn't just say, yes, that's what I said. I do always win things in my second season, or I usually win things in my second season. It's the way he said it. I correct myself. I always win things in my second season, and he just seemed like very kind of indignant, I guess, in his tone, which is why I feel like that particular interview. It's not just the words; it's the way he said it has kind of stuck with him throughout this season, and has been, I guess, almost like a stick for people, particularly in the media, I guess people like myself, when it's not going well, to beat him with when the results have been poor, and every sort of avenue of sort of fulfilling that this season with Tottenham has been cut off, whether it be going out the cups or obviously the way the league's gone. But he's sort of suggesting that he feels like it's been twisted and that was a bold claim, and that's not how he said. He said today again that when he was asked if he regretted it, he said basically he was just stating a fact. What do I expect me to do? And people are sort of twisting it into a bold claim. And look, one of the things I love about Postecoglou is how honest he is and some of the way he speaks. So it might feel a bit rich, sort of criticising him for saying this in particular. But there also is an element of he knows how this works, and saying something like that in the way he did, he shouldn't really be surprised that people will bring it up later on if he's not living up to that ambition. Now, it'd be interesting to see what you think about all that, whether you feel it's fair cop to criticise him for it, or to hold him to that standard this season if he doesn't surpass it or not. But I think that's where I am on that particular comment. And he said today He's very comfortable and very proud that he's won things, as rightly he should be. He said, I wouldn't be sitting here otherwise, and that's definitely right. The success that he's had and the journey he's had, which he is very passionate and defensive about, which understandably so, because he's had to scrap his way to get to this point. I mean, people forget that, I remember doing that interview with him in Perth during pre-season when he was talking about getting, if even not even job interviews, just sort of chats with clubs in the Championship and Premier League, and they're not even really giving him the time of day, potentially partly because he was an Aussie. That might have come into it, I would not be surprised, or just because they dismissed his achievements in other parts of the world that are sort of looked down upon compared to this division. So you understand that how much he's had to scrap to get to this point. And he reiterated, time will tell if I do it here, and if you're not, he can't say it anymore. But it was an interesting point about it, and I do think it's something that I do wonder sometimes if he does regret sort of going down that line, because watch the interview back, he could have just batted it away. He didn't have to say it in the way he did. Maybe it was a deflection technique after a North London derby defeat. I don't know, but personally, in my opinion, I feel like it slightly unnecessarily up the ante on himself and raise the expectations. But again, I'm saying these words now expecting sort of pushback from some of you guys who are sort of quite the way they see it on that particular comment, and fair enough. I guess that's just down to whoever's opinion it is, and I feel like I'm generally quite fair. And look, let's be honest, he's in a difficult spot at the moment after this season. This is the Premier League. He's had, it's Europa League this game, but this is the Premier League, and after so many defeats, you have to expect a bit of scrutiny and a bit of pressure, because that's what comes with being the manager of Tottenham Hotspur when you're 13th in the league, I guess. But obviously, as I've reiterated, this is a great opportunity. Get through in the Europa League, and they can still win this. They've definitely got the players to do it. And when Ange plays the kind of football which at times we've seen, particularly last season. I mean, I was watching back the other day at the Crystal Palace, I think it was in the first or second goal in the 2-0 away to Crystal Palace win. I forget when it was in the season, but some of the football was so sublime, and we just haven't seen it enough this year. I guess a lot of it down to injuries, but if they can try and get back to that, it shows you what is possible, as we saw with the 4-0 against Man City earlier this season. Anyway, in this game, they're going to be, just on to some injury news, they're going to be out without Kevin Danso, who unfortunately is the latest victim to a hamstring injury this season. Apparently it happened right towards the end of the Bournemouth game. They need to let it settle down. It's hard to say how long he's going to be out for. Obviously, after the Fulham game, they've got the international breaks. There seems to be a bit of hope that he'll be back after that, but you never know. I mean, this season with Tottenham's injuries, it's hard to sort of put timelines on it. I feel like when Ange has put timelines on it, which, in good faith, you feel like he's trying to sort of help and try and set expectations of when people can expect these players to return. Often those deadlines have been kind of missed because injuries are sort of movable feasts. So I don't know, we'll see on him, but unfortunately he's out, which is a blow because he's been very good since he's come in. I watched open training earlier. Richarlison was training on his own, but that is apparently progress on his front, and hopefully Andrew was saying that after the international break, there or thereabouts, he'll hope to have Richarlison back. And then he was asked about Sarr as well, not injury-wise, but because of Ramadan. Obviously, this is the time of Ramadan at the moment, which means that he's fasting in the day, which sort of underlines, superhuman performances when you're not allowed to eat, during the daylight hours. In this period is always so impressive with Muslim players that they can, and athletes in particular, how they can, the output they can produce during this time when they're not, they're not eating anything during the daylight hours. Very impressive. But apparently it's not just Sarr who's doing it, and so that Jed Spence as well. I wasn't aware personally that he was Muslim, but apparently he's also fasting at the moment. So just fair play to those guys and what they're able to produce when they're not fueling in the same way that other players are. And finally, Romero and Van de Ven are both available, which is good news, I suppose, obviously for a lot of reasons, because they're absolutely pivotal players, albeit Romero had a bit of a shocker on his comeback the other day. Fingers crossed he doesn't put in that kind of performance, because if he does, Alkmaar won't well make the most of it. But with Danso injured, having their two key centre-backs back will be absolutely massive. Just briefly on Vicario's points that he made, kind of what I was saying about the fans earlier. He said the best version of Tottenham or Spurs is togetherness from us on the pitch and fans in the stands. So he's kind of calling on everyone to sort of unite ahead of this game, hoping for that sort of big atmosphere in the stands, which can sort of roar them over the line. And I do think, as much as fans might feel a bit touchy about being sort of lectured, or in some way feeling like they're being lectured over how they can or cannot support the team when it's been such a difficult season. The reality is Spurs are going through a really tough period at the moment, and they need every advantage they can get against a solid and difficult to break down AZ team. So fingers crossed that they can produce that kind of atmosphere, because they're going to need it, I think, tomorrow. He's still very much behind the manager. Obviously, they're going to say that publicly, but he seemed pretty 100% on that. He said we can be successful in Ange's way. He said that the pressure is on the players rather than the manager, and that they'll have to deal with it. Just interesting, finally, on one of the point I messed out on Postecoglou, talking about how they approach the game, because obviously they're 1-0 down going into it. And he said it was basically the same as any other game. He said the beauty of our approach really is nothing really changes. And I think that almost that line, whatever happens in his tenure, if it goes on to have great success, or if they lose tomorrow and he leaves, because that seems like a possibility, that might be kind of defining, really, that sort of approach which he sort of sticks by, and whether he should have adapted more, or whether he shouldn't, or whether he'd be proven right over time that they drill it in so much, this style of play, and when they get the players back, that it is successful. I think that's almost like the question mark around his whole tenure right now, sort of crystallised in one sort of sentence. I guess finally, let's talk about the lineup. What I reckon will happen. Obviously, Vicario in goal. I think Porro wasn't great, to be fair, against Bournemouth, so I would not be surprised if Spence starts at right back, Doggy at left back. I'm presuming Romero and Van der Ven start. Archie Gray turned 19 today, probably be on the bench. I just can't see him playing at holding midfield at this point. Still, obviously, the future surely is him in that role, but ahead of this massive game, I'd be surprised if he suddenly threw him in there. Could happen, but I'd be surprised, and I think it'd probably be Romero and Van der Ven from the beginning. If not, then you think Gray, although Davies is also back, so there are options with Danzo being injured. But I imagine Romero and Van der Ven. Then you've got the holding midfield position sort of conundrum. Like I said, I don't think Gray will start there just because we haven't seen it so far, so why would he do it on the eve of the biggest game of the season? Bentancur is obviously suspended. Basuma started the other day, and I presume that was with regards to this particular game, but he was taken off at half-time. I would be surprised almost at this point. Not shocked because of the lack of options, but I'd be surprised if he started Basuma because of how poorly he played the other day and how poorly he's been playing recently. So I think Bergvall starts in the holding role. I think it'll be Maddison and Sarr. Sarr's energy and Maddison's creativity. They've got to score goals. They need to win this game. They need to attack, and they need to take the game to AZ. So I think those three in the midfield, and then Solanke up top. Son, I imagine, starts out left, and then I think maybe Odegaard. I think Johnson, he came off at half-time as well, I think, in the last game. He didn't make much of an impact. Personally, I feel I like him much more as an impact player. It's a whole conversation we should probably be having around football these days, that and it's been put to me by a few commenters, that we put too much emphasis in this country on the starting lineup, rather than how important it can be to be an option off the bench in changing a game. But I guess the nature of that is, it's just how we grow up here. Like, if you're not in the starting 11, whether it be Premier League or whether it be playing for your Sunday League team, it's almost a slight. It feels like it does feel like a thing that we're used to here, of being in the starting 11 is just massive, and if you're not starting, it's not the same as in other sports. Maybe that needs to change, but that's the way it is at the moment. And I feel personally Johnson's better off as an impact player, and from what I've seen, the flashes of Odegaard so far, I quite fancy him to start on the right, but we'll see. Anyway, that's my starting lineup. Those are my thoughts from today ahead of an absolutely massive game. Love to hear your thoughts on all of it. What you're thinking of the starting lineup, where you think this leaves Ange, what you made of the press conferences today, and I will speak to you after the game. Fingers crossed Spurs can win this, and they can get some momentum and keep that Europa League and that trophy. It's not just about Ange, obviously it's about Tottenham. 17 years since they last won a trophy. Keep that dream alive, because we know they've got the players to win this competition. Cheers, guys.